I started growing my own vegetables and fruit at home in my kitchen. And that's really when things started to change. And then for me, a big piece of it was finding mentors that have lived for years beyond me. Like I surrounded myself with people that were older and wiser that could take me out into the woods and teach me about foraging from the ground up.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Scratch the surface of an explorer and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. Welcome to Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, in association with the Explorers Club. I'm your host, Richard Wiese. When you think of explorers, you might picture someone scaling a mountain or diving into the depths of the ocean. And I know for me, it's like Indiana Jones. But exploration isn't limited to uncharted territories. Sometimes it's about rediscovering the world right outside your door. Our guest today, Chrissy Tracey, a first-generation Jamaican American who grew up in my home state of Connecticut. As a child, was captivated by the wild berries and the garlic chives in her backyard. And let's fast forward to today, 2025. Chrissy has transformed that childhood curiosity into a remarkable career. And I'm going to list off some of these things. She's a vegan chef, a forager, a sustainability advocate, an artist, and the author of the acclaimed cookbook, Forage Feast. Hi, Chrissy.
Hi, Richard. Thank you for a wonderful introduction.
You know, whenever somebody gives me a big introduction, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to live up to this. You know, there's always that imposter syndrome when someone puts too many accolades. So you and I both live in Connecticut. Beautiful background I see there, the new green of spring. Yeah. So when you were a kid, there obviously was a lot of outdoor time when you were spent just roaming the woods. So tell me a little about your childhood.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town called Cheshire, Connecticut, one of 7 kids, and we were all very different. Some of us were just avid readers that stayed indoors all day. I was more of the outdoor explorer since the moment I can remember. My father used to wake up and make us breakfast. He'd always make, either like this Jamaican porridge with all of these spices in it, or he'd make a nice bowl of oatmeal with a bunch of fruit. And right after breakfast was finished, I would call up my friends or go on a solo venture, and I would say, hey, do you want to go outside and play, right? And from that moment, it would be 8 a.m. You would not see me back at home until 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. And my parents had no idea where I was, except for the fact that I was out exploring the woods. So I had this innate love of nature that just almost felt primal. It was always there. It was always such a driving force for my life and who I am today. And it's just something that's been very natural. I love being outside of the natural world, kind of filling my time with green spaces. I realized from a young age how much it impacted my mood to be able to get outside and really immerse myself, and especially when it came to building community. So it's a little bit about my childhood.
Your childhood sounds like the childhood of most people who grew up before the internet or, maybe phones. I'm sure your parents said the same thing. Or, I know my generation that, it was like either you're in or you're out. And when you went out, you were just gone and, you were sort of feral. When did you get the idea that it might be fun to eat some of the things that are growing in your yard?
I must have been in 2nd or 3rd grade. So I was I was like 7 or 8 years old. And I started to really notice nature a little bit more than just being this green space. And I started to observe the wild raspberries and wild blackberries that were growing at the hedges of my parents' property. And I, would pick them up and squish them between my fingers and smell them and really use all my senses to try to understand what these things were. And I mean, I realized this is a wild berry, and I tried one of the wild raspberries, and I told my mom, we have raspberries growing outside, right? And she was kind of like, uh, please don't do that. We don't know if they're edible or not. I was like, well, I already ate two of them, and they seem very edible. It looks like a raspberry. It smells like a raspberry. It tastes like a raspberry, so I'm pretty sure you could eat it. But I was young and I didn't really know. I had nothing to prove it besides what I was driven by internally. And then that kind of led me to exploring more things like the wild garlic chives that would grow in my backyard. And I plucked one up one day and I brought it to my mom and I said, smell this. I'm telling you, this is edible. And then I went further into my investigation, took one of the spades and dug it out of the ground and brought her the cluster of garlic chives to show her that it had these little onion bulbs on the end of it to prove my point. She kind of squashed that once again, just because it's a totally different environment. They grew up in Jamaica, they know the land there, but they weren't very convinced about what was growing wild in our own backyard. So I kind of put that aside for a couple of years until I discovered the internet. And I was always the techie one in my family. So once we had AOL dial up internet, I started to look into things a little bit more myself to prove my theories. And I was like, I actually did know what I was talking about when I found those wild raspberries and the wild chives, but I really left it alone because I was scared out of exploring foraging further at that point in my life.
At that point, it sounds like a sad story. What may have been possible wouldn't, but I have been to Jamaica many times. Just my sort of impression of people who live outside of the big cities is that they do pick wild things, whether it be mangoes that are growing in their yards or some of the different edible vegetables. So was there someone in your Jamaican life that may have steered you differently?
Yes. So it was my grandmother actually who kind of opened up my mind and my perspective to wild foods and kind of got me more into the scientific side of foraging. And I was about 16 years old. It was my first time I was visiting Jamaica. And, we had a long travel day. Where my grandma lives, kind of in the heart of Jamaica, and it's really just woodsy, red dirt roads, different than what people imagine when they think of Jamaica, right? No blue water everywhere. It's a small farming community in what's called the Sweetland district, and there is wild food everywhere. So I remember arriving to my grandmother's house and her looking at my siblings and I, and after we hugged and everything, just, are we hungry? Absolutely. It's been a long day. So what I expected her to do was to go to the kitchen and prepare a meal out of whatever was in her pantry. But what she did next surprised me. She went to the backyard. She started picking wild callaloo and different herbs and fruits that were growing in the backyard. And we started off with, just having coconut that was from her backyard and sipping on that and enjoying the jelly inside. And then she made this beautiful meal for us of like fried dumplings and plantains and callaloo and ackee to really just nourish us. And I was like, wow, that was eye-opening for me. Obviously, I knew about farming, but I didn't know about foraging or living off the land in this way where you're really just going out to the backyard and making something out of what you know. And nobody really taught her what everything was, but she just watched what her mother did growing up. And it's just like this kind of innate knowledge that just continued to be passed down and at some point got lost.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. That sounds like an amazing experience. And I have kind of a theory about food that there's a direct correlation between someone's passion for trying different new foods and their passion as a person. And I think there's a big difference. And I could even say this, I have twin boys. One looks at food and goes, wow, what is that? Let's try it. And the other one's like, ooh, what's that? I don't want to try it. And so you obviously had, the passion to where it was interesting. So there's still a huge leap from someone who had just had a great Jamaican meal with your grandmother to someone who's a sustainability advocate. Now you have this fantastic book out on, foraging and feasts. So how does that go from just a cool weekend or week with your grandmother to a career?
From that moment onward, I would say my view of food transformed because I had never really thought too hard about where my food came from or the people or processes behind what I was eating. I grew up in a very health conscious family. So when my mother and father moved to the States, they were out in Michigan, and my mom's first job was working on an industrial farm peeling potatoes. That farm also had, cattle, livestock. And she saw factory farming firsthand and was totally just turned off by the idea of living life in such a way that the animals were just being mistreated. And also she realized there was a missing relationship between farmers and the meat that was going out there. And she was utterly kind of turned off by eating meat at that point in her life. And she was pregnant with my second sister and said to my father, I don't want to eat meat anymore. This is different than what I was raised with in Jamaica. And she said, I would like to raise the rest of the family on a vegetarian diet. And so that's what we're going to do. And my dad agreed. Happy wife, happy life, I guess. So I always grew up with a family that, or parents that were really immersing themselves in food education, because from that point on, they kind of had to relearn. Like plant based has always been a part of Jamaican culture to an extent, but that was always complemented with meat. So they were in the process while they were raising us of relearning how to eat in a balanced and nutritious way. That also brought light to sustainable eating and just like herbalism as a lifestyle. Like we didn't really grow up with a lot of doctor's visits in terms of my parents would give us bromelain, which is pineapple root for our headaches and things like that, instead of Tylenol. That kind of lifestyle was almost already built into me. So there was a kind of switch that happened along the way after visiting my grandmother where I was like, oh, maybe this shouldn't just be the responsibility of my parents to tell me what to eat and how to live. Maybe I should be examining my relationship with food on a personal level and connecting it with it different and learning the land and learning what the land is trying to teach me rather than just living in whatever way I was raised or taught. That lens switch kind of changed my life because I had never thought about food as anything more than nourishment at that point. And then I started to realize different issues with our agricultural systems and different issues with, eating everything processed and why we shouldn't be doing that to our bodies. And I kind of had this mindset switch, but I was still very young at this point. So a lot wasn't in my control. But it was really when I went to college where I was able to make some new decisions around the way I wanted to live. I started growing my own vegetables and fruit at home in my kitchen. And that's really when things started to change. And then for me, a big piece of it was finding mentors that have lived for years beyond me. Like I surrounded myself with people that were older and wiser that could take me out into the woods and teach me about foraging from the ground up. Because for me, when you're able to have an immersive experience with nature and have the wisdom of someone that's been doing this for much longer, I found that I latched on to knowledge a lot quicker. Everything just felt very natural.
You've come across quite a few items in your own personal journey, and the fact that it was something within you that made very good choices. I think that most people are so unaware of where their food comes from, right? You look at a milk container, it has a nice, big barn and a happy cow, or, you get a chicken egg and you see pictures of like these happy, chickens out there.
Mm-hmm.
The health ramifications, all the whole sustainability. And I guess the piece that probably worries people the most when they say going vegan, and I'm going to give our audience a little bit of a secret. The first time I met you was at the Madison Beach Hotel in Connecticut, and you were making a vegan dinner for some other famous chefs. Jacques Pepin was there, right?
Yeah.
Famous French chef. The meal was amazing. I mean, amazing. And in fact, at some point, I have to get your recipe for the chocolate mousse you made because that was pretty damn good. For people who may be thinking about this for a lot of reasons. Is the ethical, is the health, but I guess the biggest thing is the taste. Are people going to enjoy vegan meals? What is it that you would say to somebody who is thinking about making that switch?
Yeah, I think the taste aspect is a barrier to entry for a lot of people when it comes to opening their minds to what's possible. You know, there was this chef that I was listening to. He owns 11 Madison Park, and he had made this statement that meat has already been discovered and rediscovered so many times, but vegetables, there's still a whole world to understand when it comes to vegetables. They require a certain level of patience and respect and care that nobody seems to put into them. You know, everyone thinks, oh, let me just boil some broccoli and call it a day. Let me just saute asparagus in olive oil and call it a day. And then they're not fulfilled by the end result because they're not understanding that each vegetable needs to be treated differently to extract the best possible flavor and textures as well. So I think one thing that I try to say to people that are thinking about incorporating more plant based into their lifestyle or go vegan is to think about the way that you eat chicken, right? When you have a piece of chicken, do you just put it in a pot of water and then boil it and then just eat it straight out like that? Do you just take that piece of chicken, bake it, and do nothing to it? No. What is making it so succulent, or what is it making it taste so delicious? It's the herbs, it's the spices, it's the fats that you're applying. And if you take those same principles and apply that to your vegetables, and you apply that same level of love and care to your vegetables, you're going to have a satisfying meal experience. And if you choose to ignore those things, then you're going to think that vegetables are boring and bland and tasteless.
What's the one wild ingredient that everybody should try at least once? I mean, we both live in Connecticut. Because you once said to me that when I went foraging, that people should consider there's more food in these woods we were walking than in their entire grocery store. So, what would be that one ingredient or that one wild food you say, man, that's going to change your perspective?
I would have to say golden chanterelles would be the one ingredient that I would say everybody needs to try this mushroom. And even if you don't like mushrooms, because it will completely change your perspective on wild foods. But that would be a mushroom that I would recommend. And then for plants, I would recommend stinging nettles. I think thing that makes stinging nettles, which is like a wild spinach, what makes them so special is in nature they're so daunting. They have these large stingers all over the plants, on the leaves, on the stalk. Nature's really telling you, don't touch me. And if you brush by it, you know, it'll give you a short-term rash. But if you clip the plant with some gloves on and you throw it in boiling water for a minute, those stingers retract. It also brings out the brightness and the flavors of that veg. And the thing that's so special about stinging nettle is it works really well in sweet applications, like you can make a cake with them, and it brings out these really nuanced tea-like flavors, or you can apply it in a savory manner and cook it down in some fat and some really nice spices, or you can put it in a soup, and it's really going to create a flavor profile that's unlike anything you've ever had before, because I can say it's like wild spinach, but it's got so many nuanced flavors that the grocery store will never have for you that you just got to get out there and try it.
Hey, Chrissy, you were just recently elected and honored as part of the Explorers Club 50. And the Explorers Club 50 is 50 people who are changing the world that the world needs to know about. Did you ever feel that you would be recognized in the space of exploration or science?
It was such an honor and such a surprise to be nominated for this because I haven't really thought about food as a means of exploration. But then when I realized that food is the one thing that really truly connects us all and is the one thing that anyone, regardless of politics, etc., could really agree on. Like you can bring two people together over a good meal, and at some point you might find a middle ground with that person just because you enjoyed a delicious meal together. I don't know. Like I feel as though it's a bridge to the past and it really evokes a sense of storytelling and belonging. And the best way I can describe it is every time even when I most recently did a public lecture at the Explorers Club, I had a woman from China come up to me and say, I'm going to Yunnan in China next week. And the reason she was so excited is because that's the area in which she grew up. And it is the largest place worldwide for for mushroom biodiversity. It has the most mushrooms you'll ever find anywhere else in the world. And so we built a connection there. And then there was another woman who was from Russia, grew up foraging for mushrooms with her family. And so what I found is that food is a means of exploration, a very important one that connects people to place, belonging, culture, identity. And it can bring up these untold stories and really allow people to connect on a totally different level than anything else. And so it was really just such an honor to get that recognition, because it wasn't something I ever thought about or anticipated. And for a while there, I was like, oh my God, I have a little bit of imposter syndrome here amongst, ice core scientists, deep sea explorers. But throughout this time and connecting with the cohort and everything like that, I've realized that there's a place for me here. And I've been able to, see, observe, listen to the stories and the work of everybody else around me and realize that I did belong. And I've found those little connections. Like I even think about Elodie Freeman, who studies chimps and their behaviors in the forest with healing
self-medication, medicate using plants as
Yeah.
yeah.
And for me, that was like, I want to go out on an exploration with her, because for me, I use plants as medicine as well. And so there's these little gaps. I think about the mullein I forage in my backyard that I can make into a tea that helps when I have asthmatic symptoms. Like there's these very special pockets that you end up being able to connect with people over. And it's all about like meeting in the middle and finding those pockets of connection. And you can do it with almost anything in exploration. So yeah, it's been a real honor.
So, looking back again on your path, I feel like you took very courageous steps without, maybe even realizing it at the time. Now that you're getting a level of success, you've been on, television shows, you have books. Do you feel a sense of responsibility to represent, I don't know, women of color, children of immigrants, the environmental world, the culinary world? Do you feel like that mission is getting more and more defined for you, or at least the pressure of it?
The short answer is yes. First of all, I have not really seen people in the same line of work that look like me or that focus on the type of work that I do for so many years. There was no blueprint for me, in a sense. Like I've always admired different people along the way, but it is different to be able to walk in a space as a first generation Jamaican American woman and really establish a legacy in a way that allows other people to realize that they can be explorers too. And it's really about expanding your worldview and not allowing yourself to be limited by what you see or don't see in the world. And I think that's something that is an important lesson for anyone to learn, because once you allow yourself to see the possibilities of what you can be, the world is your oyster. Like I have had so many people reach out to me on Instagram and say, because of you, I'm saying like other Black women or people from down south that aren't used to eating vegetables. I've had people go plant-based because of me. I've had people come into my DMs and say, I never saw myself in this space before, and now I see that it's possible. And how can I become more like you or do these things? And they're inspired because they see someone that looks like them. And I'm really fortunate that I never saw lack of representation in any space as like a downfall for myself. I always just saw it as, my mom always taught me this one thing: if there's not a seat for you at a table, bring a chair. And I've lived my life through that lens, because I've seen my mom, I've heard her stories going from peeling potatoes as her first job in the US and ending her career as a superintendent of a school system. How crazy is that? She was the first person to graduate in her family, her entire lineage. You know what I mean? And my dad has the same lens as well. Like because I was raised in a way that never taught me to look at anything as a limitation, I've been able to really, I think, harness a special kind of power when it comes to the way that I think and how those thoughts manifest their way into my life. If there's something I want to do, I go after it to the best of my ability. Not every idea works, right? But that's the point. You keep on going, you keep on moving, you keep evolving, and you allow that to drive you to the next step. It's been really special to be in this space and I guess be that light for other people and show them that it is possible.
I love your mother's advice about bringing a chair to the table. What do you think the best advice you ever got in life was?
I think the best advice I've been given is to just be myself. That's the constant advice I've gotten from my mom, from my family, from friends, from you. Like, I think you have to lean into who you are because you can't escape it. And Jacques Pepin told me the same thing because his dream for me is to have a restaurant someday. But yeah, you can't escape who you are. So the quicker you're able to realize that and lean into it and just do the best you can with who you are, I think your potential just expands. So I think it's really important to be authentic. And the moment I realized that authenticity is really going to be what drives success, and I really let go of a lot of the different weights of the world I was putting on myself for how I had to show up or how I had to act or how I had to appear or be, I felt more free. And I think it's allowed me to accomplish a lot more than I could have ever imagined. So I'm just continuing to try to walk into that space and become confident in who I am. And I think that's what everyone should really focus on.
That's advice that you hear all the time. Just be yourself. And I think for a while, no one, especially when you're younger, you say, well, what is me? You're sort of trying to figure that out. But I think who you are is terrific. And I feel so fortunate that our paths have literally crossed in the woods foraging. And promise me that we'll go foraging soon. We just live not so far from each other.
Yeah, we'll definitely get out in the woods. Mushroom season is upon us. It'll be really fun.
The other day when I saw you, I brought a bag of mushrooms that were growing in a wood chip pile by my house. I had a lot of them. And you said, yeah, those you can eat. And when I got back, the guy who cuts my lawn got rid of all of those too. He thought he was doing me a favor. I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I have such a big treasure trove of mushrooms I'm going to saute up and eat with my son who likes different foods. And it was taken away. So there you go.
Well, they'll come back next year. Now you know.
Now I know. All right, Chrissy, thank you so much. And really good luck with your career.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate your time.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support. So make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.